Hello everyone and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Pentax MX. Now before we get too far in, I do want you to know if you learn better by reading, I have released a book on this camera that has a lot of overlap with this video, so you can pick that up and read along or carry that in your camera bag. Here's what the cover looks like, as well as what some of the internal graphics look like, so you can get a sense of how it's presented. And of course there's a link in the video's description to my Amazon books, and if you want to pick that up, please do. So the Pentax MX was a 35mm interchangeable lens SLR. Okay, what does that mean? It means it can take any 35mm film within the limits of the ISO, which I don't have written down, but 32 to as fast as 1600, so a pretty decent range right there. And throughout, in the second video, I'll show you how to load film into the camera. Interchangeable lens SLR means that the lens can be taken off and put back on at any point when you're not taking a photo without messing up your film. And that's the interchangeable lens part. Single lens reflex SLR means it has a single lens on the front. The light that you're going to use to take the photo enters the lens, and until you take it, it bounces up through this reflex housing here, this pentaprism, to your viewfinder eyepiece back here, so that you can see exactly, or pretty close to exactly, what your photo is going to look like. It uses a center-weighted meter. What does that mean? If you imagine that what you're looking at right now is what's going to be your photo, then the area in the middle of the frame provides the majority of the metering information. The area outside of that provides the minority. I don't have it written down in the script what it is. I think it's 60-40, don't quote me on that. But the point is that the majority of your metering information comes from the center of the frame, the minority on the outside. The shutter speed range on this is 1 second to 1/1000th of a second and bulb. The viewfinder that we talked about very briefly a moment ago, right here, has 97% magnification and 95% frame coverage. What does that mean? It means that what you see in the viewfinder is 97% of the size of what's going to be on the film, and that makes manual focusing of lenses, which is the only thing you can do. This is not an autofocus camera, but that makes your focusing much easier because you have a very large image in here. 95% frame coverage means if you imagine that what you are seeing right now is what's going to be on your film, then roughly 2.5% on each side, and the top and bottom will be cut off. And here's a graphic showing a photo that was taken through the viewfinder, as well as on some ground plastic over the shutter curtain area, so you can see how what's in the viewfinder lines up with what's in the shutter curtain and how that 95% frame coverage plays out. The Pentax MX has interchangeable focusing screens, and in the second video I'll show you how to do that, but the focusing screen is right there inside of this, and that's what the image is focused on when you're focusing your image. It can be removed, and up to 8 other options are available. Also, the Pentax LX focusing screens will fit in this camera, so you can use those as well. Some of them are a little bit better than the older MX focusing screens. The flash sync speed on this is 1/60th of a second, which we know because it's orange on the shutter speed dial. In the second video, when we talk about flash use, I'll tell you all about that and why that's important to know. Also, the MX is generally considered one of the most robust Pentax bodies ever made. And by the way, I do share that view. This had a new meter type when it was introduced, which was a gallium arsenide meter, and that's about 1,000 more times responsive in low light than older meters, which means not only is this robust and well made, it works very well for metering in low light conditions, which was kind of a new thing when these were coming out. In terms of and one of the reasons, by the way, that this is so robust is that electronically, this is very simple. When this was coming out, early advent of electronic camera controls were arriving, and many of those cameras have not aged well. But the Pentax MX remains a venerable and well-loved camera because it has 9 wired connections inside of it. That's it. The entire electronics are comprised of 9 wired connections. There's no circuit board, no computer, nothing like that. Everything in here is run mechanically or off of the battery, which controls the light meter and the light meter display only. So, very simple. Also, the MX included a re-engineered shutter tension mechanism, which made the shutter speeds on this camera very stable over time and very reliable from photo to photo. Even neglected MXs should still have very reliable shutter speeds and timing today. My first MX, which I no longer have, was abused, and it worked beautifully. The known problems with the MX are very few. In fact, only known problem I'm aware of with these is that I've seen 2 or 3 over the years, at most, where the LEDs inside of the MX have died. That's very rare. Other than that, like, the only other problems I've seen with MXs over the years are where people have outright abused them and they've been physically damaged by it. Even at that, my first ever MX had a lens flange that, it's supposed to be flat where you mount the lens. It was actually at an angle because it had been driven over. I don't know, something really bad had happened to it. You know what? It still worked, and it still focused images properly. So, very strong cameras. For your camera, for the Pentax MX, the target market was the advanced user, or it was also a good professional photographer backup body. And that's more the people when the LX was around. This was a backup body for the professional. All of the operation in this was very reliable. It was very reliable in the field, in harsh conditions, and people who photographed in harsh conditions with Pentaxes would often use the MX. It was made by the Asahi Optical Company in Japan from 1976 until 1985. It was preceded by the KX, and it was followed by the LX. If you have your Pentax MX, what we're going to do is we're going to go over what everything on the camera is, and then in the second video we'll talk about what all of it does so that you understand how to use it. We'll start here on the top as we do, and technically on the front we have the strap lugs. This is where you're going to connect your camera strap. If you don't have the split rings, any standard split ring you can get at a hardware store will work. Here is the film rewind knob and lever. You lift this and rotate it in the direction of the arrow to rewind your film. You lift it up to open the back of the camera. Fortunately, there's no film in there. Flash hot shoe. That little orange triangle right there is your shutter speed index, and that tells you what shutter speed you have selected. In this case, 1/125th. Shutter speed dial right here. This is your film speed window. It says ASA at the time this camera was made. ASA was the standard. ISO took over for ASA. For 100 ASA film is the exact same speed as 100 ISO. I'll hammer that a lot in the second video as well. So if whatever film speed you're using in ISO, just dial that number into ASA and you're going to be good. This button right here is your film speed adjustment button. So if I push this down, now I can adjust the film speed. If it's not pushed down, I'm just adjusting the shutter speed. Shutter release button, shutter release lock control right here. So I can push the shutter button down, or if I lock it, frame count window, film advance lever right here. On the front of the camera, we have a couple of things here. This lever is your depth of field preview and self-timer lever. Just like that, it'll do the self-timer. I'll show you the depth of field preview in just a second. Lens release button, lens release locking pin, lens mounting index. This little window right here looks down on your aperture reading on your lens so that you can see your aperture in your viewfinder. These are the flash PC ports, X and PC, FP rather. So with these, we'll talk about this a little bit in the second video, but there are 2 different PC ports, FP and X. FP was a bulb-based flash, a single-use bulb. X is a xenon or reusable bulb flash. If your flash looks rather like this one and has a bulb that gets reused every time the flash goes off, it's an X flash. In fact, this is today and going forward, you're going to be using an X flash with this camera. If you use the FP flash sync cable connection with your X type flash, the one with the reusable bulb, the timing will be off and your flash will not sync correctly. Your images won't turn out. So if you have a reusable bulb in your flash, use the X sync. You can see up here, that's also an X sync on the hot shoe. With the lens on, we can see what the depth of field preview is going to do. I have the lens set to f5.6 right now, and if I push the depth of field preview button in, it closes the aperture down, and that allows me when I'm looking through the viewfinder to get a sense of what's going to be in focus in the image so that I can kind of gauge what the final image is going to look like. It does also make the viewfinder much darker, and you do not want to meter with the depth of field preview engaged because it will throw off your meter reading. Your camera needs the aperture to be open to have an accurate meter reading. It will close the aperture down when you take the photo. The bottom of the camera has a few different things. Over here we have the mechanical coupling for the film advance thing. There were mechanical film advances, the winders, that's the word I'm looking for, where you would push the shutter button and then it would automatically advance the film. This is the mechanical coupling for that. You just have to take this off when you put one of those winders on. This is the electronic coupling. This is what tells the winder when to advance the film. Honestly, they're kind of big and heavy. They're a lot less useful than they used to be. So if you don't have one, you're not missing out on anything. Serial number, film rewind button, tripod socket, battery chamber. We'll talk about how to replace batteries in the second video. The back of the camera only has a couple of things to look at. Here's the viewfinder right here. We've seen a couple times. This is the film memo holder. So when you open up your film, it comes in a little cardboard box. And then what you do after you tear off the flap of that cardboard box is you just slide it into the memo holder, and then you'll know what type of film you have loaded. This is the box top for Santa color, but most of them will say something like film type, speed, number of exposures, and that's just a way to remember what type of film you're using and how many frames you have. On top of the viewfinder, you'll notice maybe here, if I hold the camera correctly, there's grooves on each side. You can put some accessories in here like an eye cup, magnifier, diopter adjuster, L-arm, things like that. By and large, not stuff you're going to need for most shooting anymore. To get inside of the camera, the first thing we're going to do is lift up on this film rewind knob, and that opens up the camera back. Here's the film cassette chamber. In the second video, I'll show you how to load film in this camera, but this is where it's going to go. These 4 silver rails are the film guide rails. What these do is when the film is loaded, the film rests like this. The top 2 rails keep the film from moving up and down as it travels, and these bottom 2 rails sandwich the film flat with the film pressure plate here to ensure that the film is properly aligned so that light focuses on it correctly when you take your photo. Here is the film tension sprocket, and what this does is when you advance the film, it turns to pull the film through the camera in a smooth and direct manner, and then you're not advancing the film, it can't move backwards, and that prevents the film, which has a bit of a memory built up into it because it's plastic, and plastic that's held in a shape remembers that shape. That sprocket keeps the film from being pulled backwards into the cassette when you're using it. So when you go to rewind the film, you have to push the film rewind button down because that allows this now to spin freely, whereas without the film rewind button being pressed down, it won't. Here's a film take-up spool, and this is what the film is taken up on as it's advanced. Film pressure plate, cassette retaining spring. The film pressure plate keeps the film flat over here in the shutter area, and then the cassette retaining spring keeps the cassette properly aligned here for proper film advancing and rewind. In addition, if you look right here on the door hinge, there's a little button you can push down, and you can then remove the door. So there were things like date backs that you could put onto this so that you could imprint the date onto your film. Don't bother getting one of those. They're big, they're heavy, they don't really do anything for you. But this also makes it really easy to do things like maintenance and to replace the film door if it gets damaged. And then to remount it, you put the bottom hinge in. Let's see if I can do this without my fingers getting in the way. Slide down on the lever, and then just put the upper hinge into that opening, and then it just clicks back into place. So for some tips to make the most of your Pentax MX, I guess the biggest one is going to be that it has a center-weighted meter. And in general, center-weighted meters are super reliable. They're really good for center composing frames, subjects such as portraits. They're also really good for general photography. So you can use this just like any camera and you'll be quite happy with it. Just bear in mind that if you have something really, really bright or really, really dark, like this composition right now, in your image's center, that it could bias the exposure slightly. Honestly, with the tolerance that film today has, you probably won't have any issues anyway. Some things not to do with your camera. A big one is don't leave the shutter triggered. Whenever you're done for the day, or don't leave the shutter armed rather. Whenever you're done for the day, press the shutter button down, and that will take the tension off of the springs. Whenever you advance the film and rearm the shutter, you're putting a lot of tension onto springs. You're arming them to fire the shutter. And if they sit like that with all that tension, then that the springs can develop a memory or become fatigued and fail. You don't want that. So anytime you're done for the day, even if you still have film in here, it's cheaper to waste a single frame of film than to send one of these in to be repaired because the springs have failed. The shutter curtain in here, don't actually touch it because that's a really good way to damage the curtain, to cause it to skip its tracks or to get your finger oils on it, which can damage it, and that can brick your camera. Also, the mirror that's behind this lens, don't touch it because your finger oils can tarnish that mirror, and that can throw off your metering, your ability to focus and things like that, and otherwise make using the camera an unpleasant experience. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car because cars get really hot in the summer, really cold in the winter. When lubricating oils inside of lenses especially, but also cameras, get hot, they get really thin and then they flow to places they shouldn't be, like onto camera lens aperture leaves. And then when they get back to their proper viscosity, things don't work correctly. Your aperture doesn't stop down at all, or maybe more slowly. Gearing mechanisms don't have lubricating oil where they're supposed to, so on and so forth. Also, in really cold weather, those same lubricating oils can become thick and gummy, and that can cause them to break down over time, and you don't want to have that either. One other thing, if you are missing the mechanical coupling on your camera's bottom, you want to replace that because if dust and dirt gets in here, it can muck up the mechanism and cause your camera to fail, and you don't want that either. Also, if you leave it in your car, really good theft target. Just takes a few moments for someone to break your window or get into your car and grab your camera, and you don't want that. Don't leave your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have a really good and rechargeable desiccant pack, because plastic is moisture permeable. If moisture gets in, it's easier for it to get in than get out, and then that moisture can get onto your lens elements or into your camera leather and cause fungus to grow, which can affect your image quality and also the smell of your camera when you put it up next to your nose. And lastly, don't let your MX get wet. These are not weather sealed. And I don't think these are weather sealed. And I think the LX was the first one that was from Pentax. Anyway, don't let it get wet. Even though it's only got 9 wired connections, it does have metal components inside, and those could rust, and you don't want that. When metal rusts together, it doesn't work anymore, and that's a good way to ruin your camera. So don't do that. And just remember that your Pentax MX is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Hey everyone, if that video was helpful, check out this other video that might be helpful too.